In a quiet Seattle suburb, Fresh Harvest Market had been a community fixture for decades, a place where locals gathered not only to pick up their weekly groceries, but also to share news, swap recipes, and exchange friendly smiles. The store's familiar red and white awning, its well-worn tiled floors, and the steady hum of refrigerated cases created an atmosphere of dependable routine. Yet beneath that comforting exterior, an event was unfolding that would forever alter the lives of everyone connected to the market. It began on an unremarkable Tuesday evening when the store was about to close. Employees were tidying aisles and locking up registers, preparing for another uneventful night. At the far end of the store, behind a door labeled Staff Only, Janine Morales, one of the market's most experienced cashiers, noticed something that made her blood run cold. In the dim light of the storage area, slumped against a set of filing cabinets, lay the body of Marcus Delgado, the store's assistant manager. His face, frozen in a look of shock, stared blankly at the ceiling tiles. A thin smear of blood had trickled onto the scuffed concrete floor, and clutched in his hand was a torn piece of paper. The note, scrawled hastily in uneven handwriting, simply read, "Some truths must never be found." Janine's scream shattered the quiet, and within minutes, uniformed officers arrived. The store was cordoned off, and the harsh glare of police flashlights revealed every detail of the grim scene. Detective Alicia Nguyen, a determined investigator known for her meticulous approach and quiet intensity, took charge. Stepping into the storage room, she noted that nothing in the area appeared disturbed except for Marcus's lifeless form. There were no signs of a struggle, no knocked-over boxes or scattered files, only the eerie stillness that suggested the act had been carried out with chilling precision. Over the next few hours, Detective Nguyen began interviewing the few employees still present. Janine, still trembling, recounted how she'd entered the break room to retrieve extra cleaning supplies and found Marcus lying on the floor. "He'd been checking the shipment logs all day," she said softly. "I thought he was just working late, but then I saw the note in his hand. It felt deliberate." Another employee, Carlos Rivera, a young stalker with a friendly demeanor, mentioned that Marcus had seemed preoccupied the entire shift. "He kept looking over his shoulder and scribbling in that little notebook he always carried," Carlos recalled. "I didn't think much of it at the time, but now it seems like he was onto something." Detective Nguyen requested a search of Marcus's locker in the staff room. Inside, tucked between a few personal items and his neatly arranged uniform, she discovered a small leather-bound journal. The pages filled with careful looping handwriting, detailed daily observations about the store's operations. At first glance, they appeared to be routine notes on inventory levels and customer feedback. But as Nguyen flipped through them, she noticed entries that hinted at a growing unease. Marcus had written about discrepancies in the weekly shipment records and noted that certain deliveries were consistently short by a few units. One entry, dated just 2 weeks before his death, read, "The numbers don't match, something is off with today's delivery. Check the paperwork again." Another page mentioned, "If these shortages continue, it could be more than simple error." The tone was anxious, as if Marcus had begun to suspect that the missing items were not accidental, but part of a deliberate scheme. While forensic teams dusted for fingerprints and collected physical evidence, Detective Nguyen turned her attention to the digital trail. Marcus's work computer, still logged into his secure account, contained remnants of emails that had been hastily deleted. With help from the department's cyber unit, Nguyen managed to recover fragments of correspondence. In one recovered message, a sender using a pseudonymous email address warned, "Stop prying or the consequences will be dire." Another message, though incomplete, mentioned a final meeting scheduled to take place before the discrepancies were to be adjusted permanently. The language was cold and unyielding, and it reinforced the notion that Marcus's investigations had disturbed someone with enough power to silence him. The emerging picture suggested that the financial irregularities Marcus had noted were not random errors but part of a systematic misappropriation of goods and money. Fresh Harvest Market was part of a regional chain, and its operations were managed by a corporate office known as Evergreen Grocers. Publicly, Evergreen prided itself on efficiency and community values, yet internal audits had revealed minor discrepancies over the past year. For most employees, these were chalked up to administrative oversights in a busy retail environment. But Marcus's detailed journal indicated a deliberate pattern. Each week, a small percentage of the shipments went missing, items that could have been sold for profit if rerouted through a covert channel. Detective Nguyen expanded her investigation to include interviews with former employees of Fresh Harvest Market. One longtime former manager, who asked to remain anonymous, recalled that a few years earlier, the store had experienced a series of unexplained shortages in high-value products, items that were not easily replaceable. "I always thought it was a fluke," he said quietly, until someone started asking too many questions. The pattern had become more pronounced over time, and when Marcus began his own inquiries, it seemed like the higher-ups grew nervous. Another former employee then mentioned that there were rumors about an internal operation to siphon off inventory and resell it through underground channels. Simultaneously, forensic accountants working with the police uncovered a troubling trend in the company's digital records. Over the course of several months, small sums of money had been transferred from the store's cash registers to unaccounted-for bank accounts. Though each individual transfer was minimal, collectively they amounted to a substantial loss. The missing funds, when traced through the system, ended up in a series of shell companies with names that did not appear in any public registry. The transactions were meticulously scheduled, suggesting that they were part of an ongoing operation rather than isolated incidents. In a quiet conference room offsite, Detective Nguyen convened a meeting with her team and external financial experts. They pored over the recovered documents, the digital audit trails, and Marcus's journal entries. One expert, a forensic accountant with years of experience in corporate fraud, pointed out that the pattern of missing items and money transfers was too consistent to be a coincidence. "What we're seeing here is a deliberate, systematic process," he said. "It appears that someone in a position of authority was funneling assets out of the company on a regular basis." The implication was clear. Marcus had uncovered evidence that could topple a significant part of the corporate structure, and his murder was likely the result of someone trying to protect that secret at any cost. As the investigation advanced, Detective Nguyen received an anonymous tip delivered by email, a message that warned, "Stop digging or you'll vanish like the rest." The tone was chilling, and it suggested that the perpetrators had the means to intimidate even the most determined investigators. Instead of deterring her, however, the message spurred Nguyen on. She began to focus on a few key figures within Evergreen Grocers management. One name, in particular, surfaced repeatedly: Raymond Keller, a mid-level executive who had recently been promoted after a series of unexplained budget adjustments. Keller was known to be a quiet, unassuming man, but several former employees mentioned that he was exceptionally cautious about his work, often double-checking figures and insisting on secrecy. When Detective Nguyen questioned him, Keller offered vague, rehearsed explanations about routine adjustments and rebalancing the books. His evasiveness only heightened suspicion. Around the same time, surveillance footage from the Fresh Harvest Market parking lot provided a critical piece of evidence. In a series of grainy images, a dark figure was seen near the employee entrance on the night of Marcus's murder. The individual's face was partially obscured by a baseball cap and a hoodie, but his movements were deliberate, almost as if he were ensuring that no one noticed something. When this footage was compared with cell tower data and access logs from the store, it indicated that the mysterious figure had used a keycard belonging to a supervisor who had resigned abruptly several months earlier under murky circumstances. The possibility that the same person might have orchestrated the cover-up, or even been directly involved in the act of silencing Marcus, could not be ignored. In the following weeks, Detective Nguyen's investigation began to unravel a complex network that extended beyond the store itself. Internal documents obtained from a whistleblower at Evergreen Grocers revealed that high-ranking officials had been aware of the discrepancies for some time. A confidential audit report, long hidden from public view, detailed a series of transfers from Fresh Harvest Market's accounts to a shell company registered in a foreign country. The report, written in dry corporate language, stated that the transfers were necessary for resource allocation and financial realignment. But the language masked a far more sinister reality: the deliberate diversion of assets for personal gain. As the evidence mounted, the investigation shifted its focus from Fresh Harvest Market to the broader corporate structure of Evergreen Grocers. Detective Nguyen arranged interviews with several executives, hoping to glean more information about the company's internal practices. One executive, who preferred to remain unnamed, admitted that the company had been under intense pressure from investors to boost profits. "Sometimes in business, you have to make tough decisions," he said, his tone measured yet guarded. "But there's a line between aggressive cost-cutting and outright theft. I can't say for sure where that line is drawn here." His evasive response only added to the growing sense that something far more significant was at play. In a parallel line of inquiry, digital forensic experts managed to reconstruct a timeline of the mysterious transfers using data recovered from the store's servers. The timeline revealed that the transfers had been occurring in a regular, almost ritualistic fashion on the same days each month, with amounts that were carefully calculated to avoid raising immediate suspicion. The transfers were funneled through a network of shell companies, ultimately linking back to a private bank account in a tax haven. When this information was cross-referenced with Marcus's journal entries, a pattern emerged that suggested the missing funds were being used to finance not only internal operations but also unauthorized projects that could potentially fund criminal enterprises or be used to secure personal gain by those in power. As Detective Nguyen assembled her findings, she received another anonymous tip, this time in the form of a handwritten note dropped off at the police station. The note, scrawled on a piece of plain paper, read, "If you search too deep, the darkness will claim you." It was a stark, chilling warning, one that resonated with the repeated threats found in the deleted emails and the hushed whispers from former employees. Rather than dissuade her, the warning only strengthened her resolve to see the case through. In a final push to connect the dots, Detective Nguyen secured a warrant to search the abandoned office of a former supervisor who had been terminated abruptly under allegations of misconduct. The office, tucked away in a quiet part of a corporate park, was a time capsule of half-forgotten projects and discarded memos. In a locked filing cabinet, officers discovered a series of internal reports that detailed the budget adjustments for Fresh Harvest Market over the previous year. One report was particularly damning, a ledger that meticulously tracked every instance of missing funds, complete with signatures and approval stamps. The entries in the ledger corresponded perfectly with the dates and amounts recorded in Marcus's journal. Even more startling was a memo attached to the ledger, written in a terse, matter-of-fact tone: "Ensure no one interferes with these figures. The operation must remain undisrupted." The memo was unsigned, but its implications were clear. With the comprehensive evidence now in hand, Detective Nguyen collaborated with federal agents and financial crime units to build a case against the key individuals involved. A series of coordinated raids was executed on several offices linked to Evergreen Grocers and the regional management team. In one such raid, officers confiscated a stack of encrypted digital files, internal audit reports, and a series of emails that revealed a disturbing dialogue between executives about covering up discrepancies and making sure the leak stops. The language was clinical and detached, and it painted a picture of a corporate culture where silence was enforced through both bureaucratic pressure and, as it now seemed, violence. The legal proceedings that followed were intense and protracted. In a packed courtroom in downtown Seattle, federal prosecutors presented their case with painstaking detail. Expert witnesses, including forensic accountants and digital analysts, testified about the precise nature of the transfers, the regularity of the discrepancies, and the painstaking records kept by Marcus Delgado. The prosecution argued that Marcus had been a dedicated employee who had uncovered a deliberate scheme of misappropriation, a scheme that, once exposed, threatened to topple a significant segment of the corporate structure. His murder, they contended, was not a random act of violence but a calculated move to silence him before his findings could be made public. Several mid-level managers and financial officers were indicted on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to murder. Under the weight of overwhelming evidence, some pleaded guilty in exchange for reduced sentences. The trial, widely covered by local media, stirred the community. Reporters interviewed former employees who described an environment of intimidation and whispered threats. Public outcry grew as citizens learned that a beloved local institution had been manipulated by powerful figures for personal gain. Yet even as convictions were handed down and sentences imposed, the case left many questions unresolved. The identity of the shadowy figure seen on surveillance footage, a man whose presence in the parking garage had been carefully orchestrated, remained elusive. Despite efforts to track his digital footprint, no conclusive identification was made. Similarly, several anonymous emails hinted at the existence of a mastermind behind the entire operation, yet that individual's identity was never confirmed. The jury, in delivering its verdict, convicted the lower-level conspirators and mid-level managers, but several of the top executives were able to leverage legal technicalities and corporate immunity to avoid the harshest penalties. In the months after the trial, Fresh Harvest Market slowly reopened, its bright aisles and familiar signage, a fragile facade over a community still reeling from the revelations. Shoppers wandered through the store with a new, uneasy awareness, as if each product on the shelf might conceal a secret. Local regulatory bodies, spurred by the scandal, enacted reforms designed to increase transparency in corporate accounting and to enhance protections for whistleblowers. Town hall meetings and community forums became venues for passionate debates about the importance of ethical business practices, and the case served as a sobering reminder that even the most trusted institutions could be vulnerable to corruption. Detective Nguyen continued her work with a quiet determination. Late at night, in the solitude of her modest office overlooking the Seattle skyline, she would revisit the case files, a mosaic of handwritten notes, digital records, and forensic reports that chronicled every painstaking step of her investigation. The memory of Marcus Delgado's calm determination in the face of overwhelming odds, and the final desperate note he left behind, fueled her resolve to pursue truth relentlessly. Though many of the conspirators had been convicted, the unanswered questions, those concerning the unidentified figure in the parking garage and the cryptic warnings from anonymous sources, remained like scars, reminders that corruption could never be entirely eradicated. The case of Marcus Delgado and the financial misappropriation at Fresh Harvest Market became a symbol of the high price of integrity. It was discussed in police training sessions, featured in local news segments, and even cited in academic discussions about corporate ethics. To many, Marcus's dedication was a beacon of hope, a call for accountability in a world where power and money often conspired to silence the truth. For others, it was a tragic lesson in how even small discrepancies, if left unchecked, could grow into a web of deceit that claimed lives. In the end, the investigation did not provide a neat, conclusive ending. There was no single moment of catharsis, a triumphant reveal that restored complete faith in justice. Instead, the case left behind an enduring legacy, a community that demanded transparency, a regulatory environment that vowed to be more vigilant, and a team of investigators who continued to pursue every whisper of wrongdoing. Fresh Harvest Market, with its familiar aisles and warm smiles, would always carry the memory of that fateful night, a reminder that even in places designed for everyday routine, hidden forces could upend lives with chilling finality. As the seasons changed and Seattle moved forward, Detective Nguyen never ceased her work. Every day, as she walked the busy streets beneath towering skyscrapers, she was mindful of the delicate balance between routine and revelation. In the quiet moments before dawn, when the city's noise softened into a distant hum, she would reflect on the sacrifices of those who dared to speak the truth, even when that truth came at the ultimate cost. Marcus Delgado's story, with its mix of courage and tragedy, remained etched in her memory as both a warning and an inspiration. There were days when the unresolved fragments of the case, the unidentified figure on the security footage, the persistent anonymous messages, and the unanswered questions in the ledger felt like a weight on her heart. But there were also days when new leads, small victories in the fight for accountability, reminded her that every uncovered secret was a step toward justice. In board meetings, community discussions, and policy debates, the echoes of that night resonated, a subtle reminder that in the pursuit of truth, no sacrifice was ever in vain. The legacy of Marcus Delgado's murder and the intricate web of misappropriated funds he had uncovered continued to influence local business practices and regulatory reforms. His story became a catalyst for change, inspiring new laws that mandated stricter oversight of internal audits and stronger protections for employees who dared to question discrepancies. While the courtroom had delivered its verdicts, the broader struggle against corporate corruption was far from over. For every case solved, Detective Nguyen knew that there would be others, each with its own dark corners and hidden truths. In the tapestry of Seattle's bustling streets and familiar storefronts, the case served as a quiet, persistent reminder that beneath even the most ordinary settings, the forces of greed and deception could manifest in deadly ways. The memory of that humid summer night, of flashing police lights in a deserted parking garage, of a fallen man clutching a cryptic note, and of a dedicated detective chasing down every lead, remained woven into the city's collective consciousness. And so, as the rain washed the streets and the neon lights flickered on once more, Fresh Harvest Market opened its doors to a new day. Shoppers, unaware of the secrets that had once lurked in its back offices, picked up their groceries and exchanged friendly greetings. Yet in the quiet moments between transactions, there was an unspoken awareness, a vigilance born of hard-won experience, and the enduring belief that truth, no matter how deeply hidden, would one day come to light. Detective Alicia Nguyen continued her career with steadfast determination, her every case a reminder of the fine line between order and chaos. Though the network behind Marcus Delgado's murder had been partially dismantled, the unresolved questions served as a call to keep digging, to remain ever watchful, in a world where even the most unassuming places could harbor the seeds of betrayal. In the interplay of light and shadow along Seattle's busy sidewalks, the pursuit of truth was a never-ending journey, one that required courage, persistence, and the unwavering conviction that every secret deserves to be exposed. In the end, the story of Marcus Delgado and Fresh Harvest Market was not one of neat closure or heroic triumph. It was a complex narrative of ordinary lives upended by extraordinary greed. It was a tale that reverberated through the halls of corporate boardrooms, whispered among community gatherings, and studied by future generations as a sobering example of how the pursuit of integrity can come at a high cost. And as long as there were voices willing to question the status quo, there would always be those like Detective Nguyen walking the streets of Seattle, determined to shine a light into even the darkest corners of everyday life. The buzzing neon of a downtown Atlanta fast food restaurant, Burger Express, had long been a fixture of the city's nightscape. Its bright signs and consistent sizzle of fryers provided a reliable backdrop to the daily grind of commuters and late-shift workers alike. For regular patrons, the restaurant was a place of comfort, a familiar haven in a city that rarely slept. But one humid summer night, as the busy crowd thinned and the hum of conversation gave way to a hushed stillness, something far darker was about to shatter that sense of routine. In the back storage area of Burger Express, beneath the rows of industrial freezers and neatly stacked crates of ingredients, a discovery was made that would send shockwaves through the local community. When Julio Rivera, the night shift supervisor, went to retrieve extra cleaning supplies, he found a body lying among the cold metal shelving. The victim was identified as Javier Ortiz, a seasoned cook known for his quiet dedication and warm smile. His once proud chef's jacket lay crumpled on the concrete floor, stained with dried blood. Clutched in his hand was a torn scrap of paper bearing a single haunting message: some truths should never be uncovered. Julio's scream echoed through the corridors of the storage room, drawing the attention of his co-workers. Within minutes, uniformed officers arrived and secured the scene. Detective Samantha Lee, a dedicated investigator with the Atlanta Police Department, stepped into the dimly lit area. Her eyes immediately took in every detail: the deliberate placement of Javier's body in an isolated corner, the absence of signs of a struggle in the otherwise orderly storage room, and the cold, almost calculated nature of the note found in his grasp. It was as if someone had planned every detail to send a message, one that threatened to reveal secrets too dangerous to be left in the light. In the days that followed, Detective Lee worked tirelessly to piece together the final hours of Javier Ortiz's life. Interviews with Burger Express employees painted a picture of a man who was much more than a dedicated cook. Several staff members recalled that in recent weeks, Javier had been acting unusually cautious. Marissa, a friendly cashier who had worked with him for over a decade, mentioned that Javier had started disappearing for long periods during his shifts. "I'd see him step away, and then come back with a distant look in his eyes," Marissa said softly. "He never said what he was doing, but it was like he was checking up on something." Another employee, a fry cook named Dante, noted that Javier had recently begun leaving handwritten notes tucked into the break room, a series of observations about missing items in deliveries, shortages in certain ingredients, and even odd discrepancies in the restaurant's inventory logs. At first his colleagues had dismissed these as the ramblings of a perfectionist, but now they realized those notes might have been more than idle thoughts. Detective Lee obtained access to Javier's locker in the staff room. Hidden beneath a set of personal items was a small, leather-bound notebook. The pages, filled with Javier's neat handwriting, contained detailed entries of his observations. One page read, "Chicken deliveries are consistently short by 3-4 pounds. Check with vendor." Another noted, "Extra sauce packets missing. Report to management if this continues." As she turned the pages, Lee found entries that grew increasingly anxious, references to unexplained shortages, unaccounted for shipments, and a final entry that chilled her. If these discrepancies are exposed, someone will stop at nothing to keep it quiet. The gravity in Javier's words hinted at a secret that could have dire consequences. Simultaneously, the digital forensics team recovered files from Javier's work computer, which had been left logged in on a seldom-used terminal in the kitchen area. Among deleted emails and temporary files, they found fragments of correspondence with an unknown sender. One recovered message warned, "Don't dig too deep, or there will be a price." Although the sender's identity was masked by layers of encryption, the tone was unmistakably threatening. The evidence began to point toward a motive beyond a simple robbery gone wrong. Someone had discovered that Javier was on the verge of uncovering a much larger secret. Over the next week, Detective Lee expanded her investigation beyond the walls of Burger Express. Her inquiries led her to question not only the employees of the restaurant, but also delivery drivers, store managers from nearby branches, and even local vendors who supplied fresh produce and meats. What emerged was a disturbing pattern, a series of small, seemingly insignificant discrepancies in inventory that, when added together, suggested that a portion of the goods was being siphoned off. The missing items were not expensive luxuries, but essential ingredients: chicken, beef, and high-end condiments that could be easily resold on the black market or used in unauthorized operations. One of the vendors, an older man named Samuel Ortiz, no relation to the victim, recalled a conversation with a representative from the supplier company. They said the orders were being adjusted for efficiency, that sometimes a little extra was trimmed off the total, he explained with a shake of his head. "I always thought it was just standard practice to cut costs, but now I wonder if there was more to it." Samuel's testimony, combined with Javier's meticulous notes, led Detective Lee to suspect that the operation was not merely about financial mismanagement. It might have been connected to something far more illicit. As Lee dug deeper, she discovered that a local gang known for its involvement in drug trafficking had recently been linked to several small-scale robberies and fence operations in the area. Although nothing in the initial investigation directly tied the gang to Burger Express, whispers in the neighborhood suggested that certain shipments from the supplier had been intercepted and rerouted to underground markets. The possibility arose that Javier had uncovered evidence of a diversion scheme, a network in which high-quality food supplies were being stolen, repackaged, and sold illegally. The potential profit from such an operation was considerable, especially if the stolen goods were distributed to a network of illicit eateries or sold on to desperate communities. In this context, Javier's discovery of the discrepancies was not just a matter of lost revenue. It was a threat to a criminal enterprise that had the means to silence anyone who got too close. Detective Lee's team worked with local crime analysts to correlate the timing of missing shipments with reported activities by the gang. They found that on several occasions, deliveries to Burger Express had coincided with nearby gang-related incidents. Surveillance footage from a nearby convenience store, showed a dark sedan lingering in the area around the same time that a delivery truck had left the supplier's warehouse. Although the connection was circumstantial, it strengthened the theory that there was a larger criminal element at work. Late one evening, while reviewing the digital logs of the restaurant's inventory system, Detective Lee found an anomaly. A transfer request for a large quantity of premium condiments had been approved by a middle manager whose name did not appear on the routine roster. This manager, identified as Brandon Lee, no relation to Detective Lee, had been working at Burger Express for only a few months, and his sudden prominence in the approval chain was suspicious. When questioned, Brandon insisted that he had simply been delegated additional responsibilities and that he was following orders. However, his answers were filled with evasions, and his body language betrayed a mounting anxiety. The investigation began to weave together a narrative of organized theft and a ruthless cover-up. Javier's diligent notebook, the encrypted emails warning him to stop his inquiries, the systematic discrepancies in inventory, and the anomalous approval by Brandon all pointed toward a covert operation. It appeared that someone within the management of Burger Express, or perhaps even higher up in the corporate hierarchy, had been orchestrating the diversion of goods. The motive might have been financial gain, but as more evidence emerged, it also appeared that the stolen products were being funneled to an underground network connected to the local drug trade. The stolen food supplies, particularly high-quality meats and specialty ingredients, had a high street value in illicit markets, and could be quickly converted into cash or used as barter currency in a community where such items were scarce. As Detective Lee prepared her case, an anonymous informant reached out to her via text message. The message was brief and chilling. "If you expose this, you'll end up like him." The informant did not identify themselves, but the timing of the message, coming on the anniversary of a similar case in another part of the city, suggested a pattern of intimidation. Instead of discouraging her, the threat only strengthened Lee's resolve. She arranged a series of discreet interviews with former employees who had left Burger Express under dubious circumstances, and many spoke in low tones about an operation to siphon off goods that no one was meant to know about. One former supervisor, who now lived in a neighboring town, recalled that he had once been asked to keep quiet after noticing unusual stock levels in a series of deliveries. "They said it was just a cost-saving measure," he murmured. "But it was more than that. It was about making extra money on the side." At the same time, digital forensic experts managed to recover more of the deleted email trails from Javier's computer. In one fragment, Javier had written, "The numbers tell a story of greed and betrayal. I must expose it, even if I'm the last to speak." The emotional weight in his words was palpable, and it provided Detective Lee with the final link in her growing case against the conspirators. With every new piece of evidence, the scale of the criminal operation became more apparent. The financial discrepancies, the covert approvals, and the systematic theft of supplies were all connected to a shadowy network that operated not only within the walls of Burger Express, but also extended to the local underworld. Federal agents were eventually brought in to assist with the investigation, and a joint task force was formed. This task force, composed of police, forensic accountants, and cyber specialists, launched a series of coordinated raids on offices and warehouses suspected of being part of the underground network. In one operation, agents seized a cache of high-end packaging materials, digital records, and several unmarked boxes of stolen goods. Among the recovered items was a ledger, a thin, unassuming notebook that contained the names of various delivery drivers, the dates of shipments, and a series of numbers that corresponded to missing items. The ledger was signed with a simple symbol, a small stylized X, a mark that would later become a chilling emblem of the operation. As the evidence mounted, Detective Lee narrowed her focus on the key individuals involved. Brandon Lee, the newly hired manager who had approved the anomalous transfers, was placed under intense scrutiny. Under questioning, Brandon's story began to unravel. He eventually admitted that he had been pressured by higher-ups to approve irregular orders and that he had been promised a bonus if he maintained the status quo. His confession, delivered in a trembling voice during an extended interrogation, confirmed what Detective Lee had long suspected, that the theft was not the result of a single rogue employee, but a coordinated effort involving multiple layers of management. In a shocking twist, the investigation took an unexpected turn when a delivery driver, one who had worked for the supplier company for over a decade, stepped forward. The driver, a gruff man named Rick Johnson, recalled an unusual incident several weeks prior. He had been unloading a shipment of premium chicken wings when he noticed that the quantity listed on the manifest did not match what was actually delivered. When he asked the warehouse supervisor about it, the response was curt, "It's just a little short, don't worry about it." Rick, troubled by the discrepancy, had quietly recorded the details on his phone, unaware that he was witnessing a small part of a much larger operation. His recorded notes, later recovered from his phone, corroborated the timeline of missing goods that Detective Lee had been piecing together from internal reports. With the combined efforts of the task force, multiple arrests were eventually made. Several mid-level managers from Burger Express were charged with fraud and conspiracy, and a few individuals with ties to the underground network were taken into custody. Federal prosecutors laid out a meticulous case in court, detailing the chain of events that led from routine inventory discrepancies to a full-scale organized theft operation, and ultimately, to the murder of Javier Ortiz, whose determination to expose the truth had cost him his life. Testimonies in the courtroom were both harrowing and illuminating. Former employees described a culture of fear in which questioning the numbers was tantamount to risking one's life. One witness recounted how a supervisor had warned him, "If you pry too deeply, you'll find yourself on the wrong end of a deal." Expert forensic accountants demonstrated how the systematic shortfalls, when aggregated over several months, amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars money that had been funneled into accounts designed to look like routine expenses. The prosecution's case was built on a mountain of digital evidence, eyewitness testimony, and physical clues, all of which converged on a narrative of greed, deception, and the ruthless suppression of dissent. Yet, even as the jury delivered convictions for several of the lower-level conspirators and mid-level managers, a lingering sense of incompleteness pervaded the trial. While those directly implicated in the theft were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, the higher echelons of the criminal network, the shadowy figures who orchestrated the operation from behind layers of corporate legitimacy, remained largely unidentified. The signature Mark X in the ledger continued to haunt the proceedings, a symbol of a mastermind whose identity would never be fully revealed. Some jurors and members of the public felt that the case was only partially solved, that a significant part of the network had slipped through the cracks of the legal system. In the months following the trial, Burger Express slowly reopened its doors. The familiar sights and sounds of the restaurant resumed, a steady flow of customers, the sizzling of grills and the friendly chatter of employees, but an undercurrent of unease remained. Shoppers and staff alike spoke in hushed tones of the case, the memory of Javier Ortiz's determined gaze, and the chilling message he left behind. The case spurred local regulators to introduce stricter oversight measures for inventory management and employee whistleblower protections. Community meetings were held where citizens debated the true cost of corruption and the importance of transparency, ensuring that Javier's sacrifice was not forgotten. Detective Samantha Lee continued her work with a quiet intensity that belied the personal toll the investigation had taken on her. Late at night, when the city's neon lights cast long shadows across empty streets, she would return to the scene in her mind. The cold, dim storage room at Burger Express, the scattered notes and the lingering echo of a life lost in the pursuit of truth. Though many of the individuals directly involved in the operation were now behind bars, the unresolved threads of the case served as a perpetual reminder that corruption, once allowed to fester, could never be entirely eradicated. In one final twist that still haunted her, Detective Lee received an anonymous envelope at her office several months after the trial concluded. Inside was a single sheet of paper, printed in a typeface identical to the note found with Javier, bearing the words "Curiosity claims its due." There was no signature, no further explanation, only a stark, unsettling reminder that someone out there had been watching, and that the web of deceit might still extend into the shadows. Though the envelope did little to alter the official case record, it reinvigorated Lee's resolve to remain ever vigilant in the face of hidden corruption. In the end, the story of Javier Ortiz and the clandestine theft at Burger Express was not one that closed neatly with a triumphant unmasking of every villain. It was a tapestry of courage and betrayal, a testament to the dangers that lie in waiting in the most unassuming places. For every minor victory in the pursuit of justice, there remained unanswered questions about those who wielded power from behind the scenes. The case served as a sober reminder that truth is fragile, and that the cost of uncovering it can be devastatingly high. As Atlanta's humid nights gave way to cool mornings and life in the city slowly resumed its relentless pace, the legacy of that fateful evening persisted. The corridors of Burger Express, now bustling with routine, held within them the quiet echoes of a murder that had exposed a web of organized theft and corruption. In boardrooms and regulatory offices across the region, new safeguards were implemented, and stricter oversight of inventory and financial practices became a priority. Community activists, inspired by Javier's quiet bravery, launched initiatives to protect whistleblowers and to promote transparency in local businesses. Detective Samantha Lee, though scarred by the memories of that night, continued her career with a steadfast determination. Each day, as she walked the streets of Atlanta under the soft glow of streetlights, she carried with her the resolve to shine a light into even the darkest corners of ordinary life. The case was a reminder that while the truth may sometimes be buried under layers of routine and deception, the pursuit of justice is a journey that never truly ends. There were no tidy conclusions in the battle against corruption, only ongoing vigilance, a commitment to asking the difficult questions, and the quiet hope that every uncovered secret, no matter how deeply hidden, might one day bring about change. And so, in the steady cadence of everyday life at Burger Express, amidst the familiar clatter of trays and the warm smiles of loyal customers, the memory of Javier Ortiz endured. It was a legacy woven into the fabric of the community, a poignant reminder that the price of silence can be unbearably high, and that sometimes the simplest act of questioning can illuminate truths that reshape a whole neighborhood. Even now, years later, when the store's lights shine brightly on a busy evening and the hum of conversation fills the air, there lingers an unspoken awareness among those who knew the story. The whispered discussions among employees, the subtle nods exchanged by longtime patrons, and the enduring commitment of investigators like Detective Lee all attest to a hard-won lesson that the pursuit of truth, no matter how dangerous or costly, is the foundation upon which a just society must be built. In this city of shifting shadows and bright neon dreams, the case of Javier Ortiz remains a symbol, a testament to the courage of one man who dared to follow the numbers and the unyielding determination of those who refused to let corruption thrive in the hidden corners of everyday life. And while the full extent of the criminal network may never be entirely unmasked, every new lead, every careful audit, and every act of bravery in the face of silence continues to push the scales toward justice, one uncovered secret at a time. Under the buzzing hum of city life, the iconic red brick facade of Wrigley Field stood illuminated under a cool autumn sky in Chicago, a monument to baseball and tradition that had witnessed countless triumphs and heartbreaks over its long history. On an ordinary evening following a hard-fought game, when the stands were emptying and the echo of cheers had faded into a quiet dusk, an event unfolded that would send shockwaves through the sports community and force a city to confront a dark undercurrent beneath its beloved pastime. Michael Grant was a seasoned sports reporter with a reputation for uncovering hidden stories in the world of baseball. Working for a well-respected local newspaper, he had earned accolades for his investigative pieces that delved into questionable plays, clandestine deals, and the murky realm of sports betting. In recent months, Michael had become fixated on a series of irregularities at Wrigley Field, whispers among players, unexplained shifts in performance during critical games, and subtle financial anomalies in the stadium's operating reports. His colleagues noted that he had grown increasingly absorbed by a story that hinted at collusion between a small circle of stadium executives and an illegal betting ring. He was determined to expose a network that, if brought to light, could tarnish the image of a sport revered for its integrity. One humid night, after a particularly tense game, Michael decided to meet a confidential source he had been communicating with, a longtime groundskeeper who had witnessed unusual activity behind the scenes. The agreed-upon meeting place was in the dimly lit parking lot behind the stadium, far from the prying eyes of the media and fans. Under the cover of darkness, Michael arrived alone, his camera bag slung over his shoulder and his laptop safely tucked inside. The parking lot, typically deserted at that hour, except for a few stray vehicles, felt unusually silent as he made his way toward a quiet corner near an unmarked service door. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The steady drip of rain mingled with the distant murmur of passing traffic. But as Michael waited, a figure emerged from the shadows, a man in a dark jacket with a purposeful stride. The stranger's face was obscured by the low brim of a baseball cap, and his movements were deliberate, as if he'd rehearsed every step. Michael's heart raced as the figure approached, and he instinctively reached for his recorder. Before Michael could speak, the man grabbed his arm with a strength that caught him completely off guard. In the ensuing struggle, Michael's phone, which contained critical emails and his investigative notes, was snatched away. Amid the chaos, a sharp blow to his side sent him sprawling on the cold concrete. The attacker's features blurred into the darkness as he fled, leaving Michael bleeding and disoriented, the remnants of his notebook fluttering from his grasp. When paramedics finally arrived, they found Michael barely clinging to life. He was rushed to a nearby hospital, where doctors fought desperately to stabilize him. But the injuries were too severe. Michael succumbed to his wounds just hours later, his last breath, a quiet testament to a story left unfinished. In the early morning light, his lifeless body was discovered in a secluded area of the parking lot by a security officer making his routine rounds. Beside him lay a torn scrap of paper, its message scrawled in shaky handwriting. Some truths should never be hidden. Detective Sarah Collins, a determined investigator with the Chicago Police Department, was assigned to the case. Known for her attention to subtle details and a tenacity that never wavered in the face of daunting challenges, she arrived on the scene and immediately began to piece together the events of that fateful night. The area around Michael's body was eerily undisturbed. The pavement was damp from an earlier rain, and there were no signs of a chaotic struggle, only the careful staging of a scene meant to send a message. Sarah noted the position of the body, the precise placement of the note, and the absence of any items that might have been left in haste. Every element suggested that the killer had acted with cold, calculated intent. Interviews with witnesses painted a troubling picture. A ticket vendor at the stadium recalled that Michael had seemed unusually nervous during the post-game press conference. He kept glancing over his shoulder, almost as if he knew someone was following him, she said softly. A groundskeeper, who had served the stadium for over 20 years, mentioned that there had been odd, unexplained movements behind the outfield fences in recent weeks, movements that he had dismissed as routine maintenance until he heard whispers among his colleagues about late-night meetings and secretive transactions. As the investigation unfolded, Detective Collins obtained a copy of Michael's personal journal from his family. The slim, leather-bound notebook contained a series of entries that grew increasingly frenetic over the past few months. Michael had detailed his findings about unusual betting patterns linked to certain games, noting that several key matches had been suspiciously close and that players on the field had behaved in ways that defied their usual performance levels. One entry read, "Numbers on the scoreboards don't match the plays, there's a pattern, and it's deliberate. I've seen transfers in the financial reports that point to a hidden hand." His writings hinted at a conspiracy that connected the stadium's internal operations with an illegal network of sports betting, a network that thrived on secrecy and collusion. Detective Collins worked tirelessly to track down Michael's anonymous source. Through a combination of phone records and careful questioning of stadium staff, she identified the source as a longtime groundskeeper named Henry Ortiz. Henry, a soft-spoken man with deep loyalty to the stadium, revealed that he had observed strange occurrences during the night shift. "There were nights I'd see unfamiliar faces near the restricted areas," he explained, his eyes clouded with worry. "I always thought nothing of it, but then I noticed that sometimes the reports would show missing items or unexplained changes in the maintenance logs. I knew Michael was looking into it, but I didn't expect this." Henry's testimony confirmed that Michael's investigation had uncovered irregularities that extended far beyond the obvious and that someone had gone to great lengths to silence him. As the digital forensics unit recovered files from Michael's damaged laptop, fragments of encrypted emails emerged. One recovered message warned, "Stop digging or you'll be the next." The email, though stripped of identifying information, was signed with a pseudonym that hinted at a connection to a well-known figure in the underground sports betting scene. Detective Collins began to suspect that Michael's murder was orchestrated by a coalition of corrupt stadium officials and shadowy figures from the world of illegal gambling. The financial records from the stadium's internal systems further supported this theory. A series of small regular transactions were being funneled from the stadium's operational budget into offshore accounts controlled by a network that was never mentioned in public filings. The investigation soon turned its focus toward the management of Wrigley Field, a revered institution that had long prided itself on its storied history and public trust. Interviews with current and former employees revealed that some high-ranking officials had been involved in secret meetings with representatives of an underground betting syndicate. These meetings, held in the privacy of off-site locations and recorded only in hushed tones, were designed to manipulate the outcomes of games by controlling betting odds and influencing player performance. One former manager recalled an incident when he overheard a conversation about fixing a game to secure a payout, a phrase that had sent shivers down his spine. Detective Collins was now convinced that Michael's investigation had threatened to expose a powerful alliance that spanned the realms of professional sports and organized crime. Among the names that surfaced in internal communications was that of Richard Monroe, a senior executive in the stadium's operations department. Monroe, known for his charismatic public persona and sharp business acumen, had been praised for his ability to modernize stadium operations. Yet, as Detective Collins reviewed emails and internal memos, she discovered that Monroe had repeatedly approved unauthorized budget adjustments and had been linked to the clandestine transfers that Michael had documented. When questioned in a tense interview, Monroe denied any wrongdoing, insisting that the budget reallocations were standard practice to improve operational efficiency. His measured responses, however, did little to dispel the mounting evidence implicating him in a deliberate cover-up. As Detective Collins' investigation advanced, the case took on a new, chilling dimension. A series of anonymous phone calls, made late at night from payphones near the stadium, contained cryptic messages that threatened anyone who kept digging too deeply. In one call, a distorted voice warned, "Not every truth is meant to see daylight." These messages were relayed to the department's cyber unit, which worked to trace their origin. Although the digital trail was cold, the persistent nature of the threats confirmed that the perpetrators were not only wealthy and well-connected, but also willing to resort to intimidation to protect their interests. In one particularly revealing moment, Detective Collins received a tip from a local sports blogger who had been following Michael's work. The blogger, who went by the handle The Insider, provided a link to a series of leaked documents that Michael had promised to publish in an upcoming exposé. The documents detailed irregularities in the stadium's maintenance contracts, the involvement of several high-ranking officials in unauthorized financial transfers, and a series of covert meetings with representatives from the illegal betting world. One document, in particular, contained a handwritten note that echoed the message found with Michael's body: "Some truths must remain in the shadows." The revelation confirmed that Michael's investigation was on the verge of exposing a scandal that could rock the entire sports industry. As the evidence mounted, federal agents were brought in to assist with the financial tracing and to conduct a broader investigation into the underground betting network. A joint task force was established, and over several weeks, the collaborative effort uncovered that millions of dollars had been siphoned off through a series of carefully orchestrated transactions. These funds, hidden behind layers of digital encryption and shell companies, were used not only to manipulate betting markets, but also to secure hush money for those who might dare to question the operations at Wrigley Field. In a dramatic series of raids coordinated by the task force, officers searched several locations associated with the stadium's management. In one nondescript office building near the stadium, they discovered a hidden safe containing stacks of internal memos, financial reports, and encrypted USB drives. Among the recovered items was a ledger that meticulously tracked the transfers, each entry precisely recorded and signed off by executives whose names appeared in internal directories but were rarely mentioned in public statements. The ledger confirmed that the financial irregularities were not accidental. They were the result of a deliberate, systematic effort to channel funds into offshore accounts controlled by a clandestine group. During the subsequent interrogations, several mid-level managers were forced to admit that they had been under explicit orders to adjust the numbers whenever discrepancies arose. One nervous accountant, in tears, confessed that he had once been told, "If you ask too many questions, you won't have any to ask at all." The haunting nature of that statement, coupled with the overwhelming documentary evidence, provided a damning insight into the extent of the conspiracy. As the trial commenced, the courtroom in downtown Chicago buzzed with anticipation. Federal prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence, digital records, forensic reports, and detailed testimonies from whistleblowers and former employees, all of which built a case that painted a damning picture of collusion between stadium management and an underground betting syndicate. Detective Collins took the stand, her testimony calm and methodical as she recounted every painstaking detail, from the discovery of Michael's lifeless body in the parking lot to the digital trail of deleted emails that threatened to expose the entire network. Her words resonated with the assembled jury, many of whom had grown up watching baseball games at Wrigley Field and had a deep-seated belief in the sanctity of the sport. Throughout the trial, the prosecution made it clear that Michael Grant had been on the verge of publishing a story that would have exposed the inner workings of the betting ring, including the complicity of high-ranking officials who were meant to uphold the integrity of the game. In a particularly impactful moment, a forensic accountant demonstrated how the cumulative effect of the small daily transfers had amounted to a staggering sum, a sum that could only have been diverted by those with both the access and the motive to control the outcomes of games. The courtroom was silent as the numbers were laid out, each figure a stark reminder of the corruption that had infiltrated one of America's most cherished institutions. Despite the compelling evidence, the trial did not offer a tidy conclusion. While several mid-level managers and financial officers were convicted on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and accessory to murder, the upper echelons of the operation managed to evade the harshest penalties through legal technicalities and corporate maneuvering. One high-ranking executive, whose approval had been a key factor in the unauthorized transfers, received a sentence that many in the public deemed a mere slap on the wrist, a decision that left a bitter taste in the mouths of fans, whistleblowers, and reform advocates alike. In the aftermath of the trial, as Wrigley Field continued to host games and the roar of the crowd returned, the legacy of Michael Grant's investigation and untimely death lingered like a shadow over the stadium. Public outrage spurred changes. New oversight regulations were implemented to tighten financial controls at major sports venues, and lawmakers introduced legislation to bolster protections for journalists and whistleblowers. Community leaders organized forums to discuss the ethical responsibilities of sports institutions, and the story became a rallying cry for those who believed that transparency in sports was essential for preserving the integrity of the game. Yet for Detective Sarah Collins, the case was far from closed. In the quiet hours of the early morning, when the city's clamor softened to a distant murmur, she would revisit the evidence in her modest office. The grainy surveillance footage of the dark figure, the carefully recorded ledger entries, and the haunting message left by Michael were etched into her mind, a constant reminder that the pursuit of truth was a journey with many unresolved paths. Though the trial had delivered convictions to some, the true architect of the betting ring and the orchestrator of the cover-up remained a mystery, a ghost concealed behind redacted documents and whispered rumors. The anonymous phone calls and the encrypted emails that warned of dire consequences continued to circulate, leaving her with the unsettling sense that the corruption might still be alive, lurking in the labyrinth of corporate power. In the months following the trial, as the city moved on and Wrigley Field's lights shone brightly over packed stands, the story of Michael Grant's murder persisted in local lore. It was recounted in sports bars and at family gatherings, a cautionary tale about the high price of exposing hidden truths. New investigative teams were inspired by Michael's relentless pursuit, and academic seminars discussed the case as a seminal moment in the modern era of sports journalism and corporate oversight. While many of the lower-level conspirators had been brought to justice, the unresolved elements of the case served as an enduring reminder that corruption, once allowed to take root, was a formidable adversary that could persist even in the wake of legal victories. Detective Collins, though hailed by some as a champion of justice, found little solace in the accolades. Each time she passed by the historic stadium on her daily patrols, the memory of that fateful night, a night when the sanctity of the game was marred by human greed and brutality, would come flooding back. She often found herself lost in thought, considering the implications of a system where even the smallest discrepancies could cascade into a sprawling network of deceit and violence. The legacy of Michael Grant's courage, though, inspired her to remain ever vigilant, to question every anomaly, and to pursue every lead until every hidden truth was brought into the light. In a final twist that still sends shivers down the spines of those who recall it, Detective Collins received a single unadorned envelope a year after the trial had concluded. Inside was a typed note with no signature, bearing the simple, stark warning, "Curiosity is a dangerous game." There was no further explanation, only a reminder that despite all the progress made, the battle between transparency and secrecy was far from over. The message deepened the mystery rather than resolving it, leaving Collins with the haunting awareness that some secrets, no matter how thoroughly investigated, might always be shrouded in darkness. The case of Michael Grant and the conspiracy that unfolded at Wrigley Field did not offer the neat closure of a Hollywood finale. Instead, it was a complex tapestry of ambition, corruption, and the relentless pursuit of truth, a reminder that the price of integrity can be steep, and that those who dare to uncover hidden injustices may pay the ultimate price. In the midst of cheering fans, roaring crowds, and the enduring spirit of baseball, the tragedy served as a somber counterpoint, a call for accountability in a world where even a beloved institution can harbor dark, unsettling secrets. As the seasons changed and the storied ballpark continued to host games that united a city in celebration, the legacy of Michael Grant's investigation endured in quiet conversations among journalists, law enforcement officers, and fans who dared to question the status quo. New safeguards were implemented, oversight was tightened, and the memories of that chilling night were preserved not as a relic of past failures, but as a catalyst for ongoing reform. For Detective Sarah Collins, each day was a reminder that the fight against corruption was never truly over. In every anomaly in a financial report, every unexplained shift in a routine transaction, there existed the possibility of a hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. And while the case had revealed a network of illicit operations and resulted in some measure of justice, the deeper, more insidious currents that had led to Michael Grant's murder remained elusive, a mystery that haunted her and spurred her to keep digging, questioning, and fighting for a system built on accountability. In the relentless rhythm of life in Chicago, where the echoes of history mingled with the constant pulse of modern ambition, the story of Michael Grant remained a permanent part of the city's narrative. It was a tale that warned of the dangers of complacency, of the perils inherent in turning a blind eye to even the smallest inconsistencies, and of the extraordinary lengths to which those in power might go to silence dissent. And so, as the iconic lights of Wrigley Field shone each game night and the city's spirit soared with the cheers of passionate fans, there lingered an unspoken understanding among a select few, a belief that beneath the surface of every cherished institution, a vigilant few would continue the pursuit of truth, no matter the cost. For Detective Sarah Collins and her colleagues, the case was both a wound and a beacon, a reminder that in the endless struggle between light and darkness, every uncovered secret, every quiet act of defiance, was a step toward ensuring that the truth, however elusive, would never be allowed to remain buried forever.